Have you ever sat in a room that used to be full of voices, laughter, life, and suddenly realized how quiet it's become? Not just quiet in sound, but in energy, in connection, in purpose. You look around and see familiar furniture, the same photos on the wall, maybe even the same cup of tea you've made every morning for the last 20 years. But something's changed. The phone doesn't ring as often. The visits are fewer. And maybe, just maybe, there's a little voice in your heart whispering, "Is this what getting older feels like?" If that strikes a chord with you, I want you to know something right up front: you are not alone in feeling alone. And more importantly, this chapter of life still holds incredible power, purpose, and potential. Today, we're going to talk about how to take that feeling of loneliness, that heavy weight that sometimes settles in your chest, and turn it into something that empowers you, emotionally, mentally, even physically. Because here's the truth: loneliness isn't just about being without people. It's about feeling disconnected, from others, yes, but also from yourself. And once you understand that, you can begin to reconnect in ways you might never have imagined. Let's begin with something simple, but life-changing: turning loneliness into self-connection. You see, we spend much of our lives giving to our families, our spouses, our jobs, our friends. And it's beautiful. But somewhere along the way, we forget how to give to ourselves. We get so used to being needed, we lose touch with who we are when we're simply alone with ourselves. Now, you may be thinking, I know who I am. I've lived over 65 years, I know what I like, what I don't. And sure, that's true. But when was the last time you sat quietly, not with the TV on or the radio humming, but really sat with yourself, and asked, what do I need today, not for anyone else, but for me? This kind of self-connection might sound soft, but it's a foundation. When you start spending time with yourself in a deeper way, through journaling, quiet reflection, or even a short walk without distractions, you begin to hear that inner voice again. Not the one that reminds you what hurts or what's missing, but the one that says, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I still matter. And the more you connect with that voice, the more your perspective shifts. Loneliness doesn't vanish overnight, but it starts to soften. It becomes a doorway instead of a dead end. Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you: finding strength through service. One of the most powerful ways to combat loneliness is actually to look outward, but not in the way we often think. I'm not talking about big volunteer programs or filling your schedule with social events, unless that's what brings you joy. I'm talking about purposeful giving, in your own style, at your own pace. For example, there was a woman I met in her early 70s named Joan. After her husband passed, and her kids moved across the country, she spent months feeling like her life had emptied out. Her days were quiet, and at first, that quiet felt unbearable. But one morning, on a whim, she baked some banana bread, just like she used to when her grandkids were little. Instead of letting it sit, she wrapped it up and brought it to her neighbor across the hall, a young man who lived alone and rarely spoke to anyone. That small act opened a door. Not just to conversation, but to confidence. She started baking more often, started offering her time at the local community center, helping kids with reading. What surprised her most wasn't how much people appreciated it, it was how much she came back to life in the process. She didn't just feel less lonely, she felt powerful again. When we give something of ourselves, our time, our wisdom, even just a smile, we tap into a deep well of meaning. And meaning is one of the greatest antidotes to loneliness. But there's another side to this conversation we need to have, and it's a little harder. It's about grief, not just the grief of losing loved ones, but the quiet, subtle grief of change. Our bodies change. Our roles change. Our surroundings change. And we don't always give ourselves permission to feel that. We try to stay strong. We say, I'm fine. We keep pushing forward, thinking that if we ignore the sadness, it'll go away. But grief doesn't work like that. It doesn't disappear because we pretend it's not there. In fact, ignoring it can deepen the loneliness we feel, because we start believing that no one understands, that no one sees what we're carrying. Here's the truth: the most powerful thing you can do with grief is to honor it. Not wallow in it. Not become it. But acknowledge that it's a part of the journey, and then choose, day by day, to carry it with grace. You might be surprised how healing it is to simply talk about what you've lost. To say their names out loud. To write them letters. To sit quietly and remember the good, even if it brings tears. That process doesn't make the pain disappear, but it transforms it. It gives your love somewhere to go. And when love has somewhere to go, loneliness loosens its grip. So maybe today is the day you write a letter to someone you miss. Maybe you light a candle. Maybe you talk to a friend, or even to yourself, and say, "This still hurts, but I'm still here." That's power. That's resilience. That's the strength of a life fully lived. Now, as we continue this conversation, I want you to keep one thing close to your heart. Loneliness may visit, but it does not define you. And it doesn't get the final word. Sometimes the silence around us isn't just peaceful, it can feel heavy, like an invisible fog. You might wake up and hear the ticking clock more than the laughter of children or the buzz of a busy kitchen. That quiet can stretch into the afternoon, and if you're not careful, into your sense of self. But here's something beautiful: loneliness doesn't have to stay as loneliness. It can transform. It can become something powerful, grounding, and even empowering. One of the most effective ways to turn that loneliness into strength is through movement. And I don't mean running marathons or signing up for gym classes, unless that excites you. I mean simply using your body in ways that feel good. A short morning stretch. A walk around the block. Tending to a few plants. When you move, you're not just exercising your body, you're reminding yourself that you are alive, that you are here, that this moment is still yours. Many people over 65 slowly stop moving as much, not always by choice. Maybe it's a little knee pain, maybe a fear of falling. But when our bodies stop, often our spirits begin to follow. You may not notice it at first, but the less you move, the smaller your world starts to feel. And when the world feels small, loneliness gets louder. But the opposite is also true. When you start moving again, even gently, your mind begins to open up again. You start to feel more capable. More in control. There's a deep connection between physical movement and emotional strength. You don't have to get in shape. You just have to keep yourself engaged, with the floor beneath your feet, the air on your skin, and the life inside you. Let me tell you about Helen. She's 74. 2 years ago, she lost her husband of 50 years. For the first few months, she barely left the house. She said everything felt dim, like the world had turned down its brightness. But one day, she started walking again. Just 5 minutes at first. She didn't even change out of her slippers. But the next week, it was 10. Then 15. She said those walks were when she started talking to her husband out loud, telling him about her day. Over time, the loneliness didn't disappear, but it softened. It turned into something she could walk with, not run from. She still walks every day. Says it keeps her steady, not just physically, but emotionally. That's what I mean by turning loneliness into power. Not by pretending it's not there, but by walking beside it, moving through it, and reclaiming your space in the world. And that leads us to another quiet but powerful shift: finding new meaning. After 65, many of the roles we've spent our lives building, parent, worker, caregiver, either change or fade. That can leave a big empty space. But emptiness is just a space waiting to be filled. And we get to choose how. Meaning doesn't have to come from grand missions. It can be simple. Maybe you're the neighbor who always checks on others. The person who sends cards for birthdays. The one who feeds the birds every morning. These might sound small, but to someone else, they could be everything. Purpose isn't about being important, it's about being intentional. About choosing to show up for life, even when it feels quieter than before. Sometimes people say, "I don't know what my purpose is anymore." But here's the truth: your purpose isn't a fixed thing you either have or don't. It's something you can grow. Plant little seeds of it every day. Try new things. Say yes to that library event. Volunteer for a cause you care about. Learn to paint, even if your hands shake a little. Meaning grows when we give it a chance to take root. And when you begin to rediscover meaning, you begin to rediscover yourself, not just who you used to be, but who you still are, and who you're becoming. And sometimes, the strongest shift doesn't come from adding anything new, it comes from changing how we see what's already there. That's where one of the most powerful tools comes in: perspective. It sounds simple, but it can change everything. When we feel lonely, it's easy to focus on what's missing. Who's not calling? Who's no longer here? What used to be? But what if we looked at it differently? What if this stage of life was actually the moment you get to come home to yourself, not to the noise of the outside world, but to your own quiet strength? There's something deeply powerful about realizing that you don't need to fill every silence. You don't need to be constantly surrounded to feel deeply connected. In fact, many people discover their truest self when things get quiet. That's not loneliness, that's solitude. And solitude, when embraced, can be a gateway to clarity, creativity, and peace. Take writing, for example. Even if you've never kept a journal in your life, just sitting down with a pen and paper for 10 minutes a day to jot down your thoughts, what you notice, what you remember, what you're grateful for, can start to reshape the way your mind works. You're telling your brain, my voice matters. My thoughts count. That's no small thing. Or maybe you pick up the phone, not to wait for a call, but to make one. Reaching out is an act of courage. It's not about chasing company, it's about building connection on your terms. Even one real conversation a week can soften the edges of isolation. And if you've ever thought, I don't want to be a burden, let me gently challenge that. Being human isn't a burden. Wanting connection isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It means your heart is still beating, still open, still strong enough to care. Some people find connection in new communities. Others deepen ties with old friends. Some discover faith, or return to it. Some start over with something completely unexpected, a dog, a gardening group, a book club. The key isn't the what. It's the why. Because in choosing to engage, to show up for yourself, you're saying, I still matter. And you do. More than you know. Loneliness over 65 doesn't have to define you. It can refine you. It can shape you into someone softer, wiser, and stronger. You've come through so much already. You've loved, lost, grown, changed. You're still here. And that alone is something remarkable. If any of this speaks to you, I hope you'll leave a comment and share a bit of your story. Not just for me, but for someone else watching who might be feeling exactly like you and needs to know they're not alone. And if this video brought you comfort, insight, or even just a small shift in perspective, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content made with you in mind. You deserve a life filled with meaning, joy, and connection, no matter your age, and especially because of it. Here's to turning loneliness into something beautiful. Here's to living your best life, right here, right now.